I'm out here in one of my local parks in Bellville in Cape Town, and the reason being is I just wanted to bring out my Helios 44M lens out for a bit of a spin. Naturally, there's so much information on this lens available these days because it's popular, it's very cheap, and it has been suggested that some of the scenes in the new Batman movie, or the latest Batman movie, was in fact shot with a rehoused Helios lens. And also I think they mentioned maybe a Jupiter as well, so old Russian era lenses. This particular one is a Helios 44M. It is a 58mm lens, so it's still in the more or less the standard lens range, a little bit, you know, it's sort of like that 55mm tack type of range. Then you'll see that it has a little logo there. Let's see if we can get it. Focus on that logo. There we go. And that is the KMZ logo. That is the factory that this lens was manufactured in old Soviet USSR. It is abbreviation for Krasnogorsk. Let me think. Krasnogorsk Mechanical Zavod. I think that is what it's, but people refer to it as KMZ, and that's the logo. It's interesting, Soviet factories all had different logos, and this is not just cameras and lenses, this was for any sort of product. You'd find it on radios or on components or fridges even. Basically, because it was all government owned, you know, they just denoted which factory things came from. The Helios lens that I have here is F2 to F16 range. These lenses, and specifically the one that I also have, they were normally issued with like the Zenit SLR cameras, and that's how I came to own this one. Is I bought a Zenit camera that was actually broken, but I was after the lens, and for fairly cheap. These lenses still, because they were made en masse, there is no shortage, and therefore their prices are very low. So if you want a lens with a lot of character, these definitely are worth it because they're fairly cheap. Mine has an M42 mount, as most of these do. I attach it to my mirrorless Canon cameras using this KNF Concept M42 RF or EOS R adapter ring. So for those who are into bokeh balls and bokeh shapes, the Helios are renowned for having the swirly bokeh. If you shoot wide open and your subject is at a certain distance relative to the background, you get that swirling background bokeh. But also what impacts that is the leaf, the aperture leaves, and in this case we have 8 that form the aperture. So if you have a look there, open up the aperture, there's 8 leaves responsible for that, and in this case they are oiled and they are not completely black. And I have read, and it makes sense to me, that because they're not completely black and they might be a bit shiny, it has an influence on the contrast possibly that you get in images. The chambers are not completely black either. They're not completely black and matte in the inside, which means there might be light reflection within the actual lens chamber, which can influence what I suppose we consider now quality. But if you're looking at vintage aesthetic, maybe that's part of the reason you get the vibe that you do. It's not always as high contrast. They don't have, for instance, like a super spectral coating that you have on some of the FD lenses. These lenses tend to have less contrast in my experience, and also what I've read. F2 to F16 range that you have there. Closest focusing distance is 55 centimeters, and it weighs 270 grams. This one uses a 52mm lens thread, which you still get a lot of filters that size. Otherwise you can just use step up or step down adapters in order to fit your circular filters on here. In the case of mine, I mean, it's a metal build, it's very sturdy. Mine has seen service. The glass is absolutely, the lens is no scratches, there's no fungus, it's absolutely gorgeous. The chamber, it's solid, but if you turn the focusing ring, there seems to be a bit of a slippage. There's like pull, and then it's tight, and then it's free again. But as far as I understand, that is the case with some of these Helios lenses. They were based on very good lenses, the original design, but they were not necessarily always manufactured at the same quality standard than the German lenses that it is based on was. After the Second World War, the USSR nationalized a lot of the German assets that was in East Germany, and a lot of that technology was basically came into USSR possession. And in this case, this lens was based on the Carl Zeiss Jena Biotar, and so in many respects this is a carbon copy. The only difference being is that they went and they replaced it with Russian glass, not the original glass that they used in the Carl Zeiss factory. As far as my reading on this lens goes, because it was manufactured in the KMZ plant and it looks the way it does looking at pictures, it seems safe to assume it was manufactured around 1978. Sorry for this rather unharmonious disruption to the flow of the video, but I have to set the record straight here. Apparently it's a well-known fact that determining the date of manufacture of a Russian lens is actually quite easy. It's the first two letters of the serial number, and in this case the first two letters is 79, which means this lens was manufactured in 1979. So my reading on the KMZ factory and the looks and all that was fairly close, but it was much easier just to look at the serial number and realize its manufacture date is actually 1979. So my apologies, but I hope this bit of information helps you date your Russian lens. For the videographers among us and those who might be using these lenses in a production setting, what is good to note is that your front element doesn't rotate as you focus. And if you have a matte box attached to your lens, you won't get like flares and things suddenly appearing and going, or shadows, especially if you're working close to subject, or if you have big lights on your subject and maybe some light from the front creating flare. The moment that starts happening, you're going to get all sorts of weird things happening in your frame that you generally don't want. Speaking of which, the focusing ring has a 220-degree angle, which is nice for sharp focus and for fine focusing, especially if you use a follow focus system. With your hand, you can get quite a bit of become quite a bit of turning. But if for shooting stills, I think it's not a problem. Now here's my take on what I expect from an old lens. I mean, I don't need a lens, a vintage lens, especially not like this. I don't need it to perform the same way a brand new lens does. I don't expect it to be a 50mm 1.4, 1.2 Canon replacement. This lens has a purpose. If I put it on a digital camera, I expect it to have some sort of a quirkiness. But in my case, it's something that I generally will probably use for personal projects, or where specifically am looking for that effect. So I'll just pop this lens on the adapter. It's just the easy screw on, and pop it onto my camera, and then have some fun here in the park. Bit hard to follow with manual focus if something moves like that, but yeah, lovely. Now, as far as I can tell, the Helios doesn't love shooting into the sun. It flares quite broadly. It's not too bad. I mean, the flare is it's gradiated. It's a gradient flare, just not all bad. So what are my thoughts on the 44M? I went out a couple of weeks ago to my local park and we had a look at this lens, worked with a bit there. Since then I've taken it out once or twice, you know, going about my business. I took a couple of extra shots. I will concur with most everyone online that it does have a beautiful bokeh. It is definitely a vibe lens. At wide open at f2, center sharpness is good, falls off a little bit to the sides. Can't say that the lens is particularly contrasty or particularly flat. In both instances, I think it is par for the course for any vintage lens. And generally, it's just a vibe lens. I mean, this is not a replacement for a modern RF lens. I think this is the type of thing that you can build a project around. This is the type of lens that you can shoot a music video around. It has a very distinct vibe. It's probably not going to blend too easy with any of your modern lenses, the RF lens, and this is probably not going to match too well. I'm afraid to speak on color casts and stuff like that because I didn't use it in a controlled environment. It was outside, so color temperature and stuff just seems to me to be neutral enough. That's basically my take on this lens, in short. If you have any comments, please put them down below. Any additional facts about the lens, please add them below. Otherwise, consider liking, subscribing, and having a look at the affiliate links down below, and you can get yourself one of these. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.